Likely you recognize this painting. It is by the famous painter Caravaggio. It's a powerful visualization, imaging of the gospel we just heard. If you look at it closely, it's shocking. It is shocking, partly because it's so beautiful. The faces, the colors are so beautiful, the figures, the light. And yet at the very center of this visualization of this gospel story is something so shocking, this grotesque fleshiness. The center of this beautiful painting is this grotesqueness, this gaping, fleshy wound. And the Apostle Thomas is poking around in that wound, putting his hand inside of it. The first time I saw it, I had to look away. It was too realistic, too horrifying. The same grotesqueness should bother us in this gospel tonight. It's one of the resurrection scenes, and Christ is using his wounds, to tell us that he is real, that he is real flesh and blood, that he's really here, that it's really him, and that he too has been a victim of other people's choices. As if to say, if we have the courage to let people know our wounds, if we can be vulnerable enough to let people we love touch our wounds, not only will they know that we are real and that we are human with them, and we are just like that, but they will come to know us and recognize us, not as some sort of a God, but human, like them. Because of the wound, we let them see. This horrifying wound, this grotesque, raw memory of a great suffering became something more for him and for them. This is a wound. His wound is everything a wound is, and more. That something more is what tonight is about. A wound and more. Molly, one of our interns this year, has offered to share one of the wounds of her life. She's offered to show us her wound, a wound in her life that too many share. There's not a one of us who makes it out of this world without a wound. Anybody who lives and breathes will be hurt. We can work very, very hard to protect ourselves. We can work very, very hard to protect those we love. But wounding will happen. And wounding will happen to the best of us.
Look, I'm not saying God caused your pain. He didn't. And we've been through that before. I'm simply inviting you to have the audacity to believe that some of your wounds could be gifts. Have the audacity to believe that some of your wounds could be gifts. Sitting in a crowded auditorium with tears streaming down my face, I met these words, which were spoken by one of my favorite presenters at a conference for high schoolers where I worked, with disbelief. I mean, it was a beautiful message and whatever, but there was no way it applied to me. There was no way my wounds could come with any grace or any gift. See, my wounds were far too deep, too raw, too painful. And they certainly weren't given to me as a gift. They were given to me by my best friend's older brother, who sexually abused me as a child for 2 years. He manipulated and tricked me with games that took away my innocence and left me broken in a way I had no way of understanding. And perhaps because of this, I repressed the memory until my freshman year of college, when it all came crashing back into my consciousness one Wednesday night at the dinner table. What I hadn't understood as a child all of a sudden ran through my mind in a whole new light. These wounds that had been hidden beneath the surface of my skin popped up. They cracked open, raw and bleeding, as I relived those days and realized the magnitude of what had happened to me. My wounds became ugly, festering, searingly painful. I burned with the anger and pain of these memories. I was angry at him for doing this to me, for ruining my childhood, for making me impure, for taking away my choice of who to give myself to and when. I started to blame him for everything that had happened in my life. I read these articles about the lasting effects of abuse and the different ways they can manifest themselves, and I decided that everything that had gone wrong in my life was his fault. From my anxiety, to my neurological symptoms in the family of Tourette's, to my self-esteem problems. But I also became so angry at myself. I poked at and I pestered these wounds, making them worse. I blamed myself for never saying no and for not somehow knowing that this had been wrong. I called myself horrible names that I wouldn't give to anyone else. I became so livid at my inability to remember any detail, to place any sort of timeline, to figure out what was happening to me. I spent days crying and getting angry over nothing until I felt numb and like I had nothing left inside me. I turned inward on myself, not wanting to talk to anyone, and definitely not praying about it, because I was afraid if I did, God would blame me, that he would tell me this had all been my fault. When speaking of God, where was he in all of this? How did God let this happen to me? The simple answer is, he didn't. This boy did something terrible to me, something I didn't understand and he possibly didn't even understand himself. But in these horrible, painful wounds came gift. In the healing of my broken spirit came opportunities to let myself be loved and to open myself up to Christ's love. As I healed, God's grace and love for me shone forth first through my boyfriend, who sat patiently with me night after night and listened. He showed me that I was loved, I was complete, and that I was not alone. God's light shone through a priest at Notre Dame who encouraged me to avoid the temptation to shut down and enter into myself. He taught me that when I wanted most to be alone, it was what I needed least. He encouraged me to reach out to and to trust others, to not let this breach of confidence overtake my life. He encouraged me to open up to others and to allow myself to experience their love, something that's never really come naturally for me. But through the process of healing, in some ways for the first time, I learned how to trust and how to receive love from God and from other people. I also learned to forgive my abuser, one of the hardest things I've ever done. God didn't make this happen to me, and he never wanted me to hurt in this way. But when I opened up myself to trust, even just the tiniest bit, he used this opportunity to show me his love, to remind me to trust in him and in other people again. God took my broken, beaten down spirit and lifted me up, turning something ugly and terrible into a way to find love. I won't say this is easy. Some days I still just want to hide my heart so it won't get hurt anymore. But these are the moments that God calls me to open myself back up to receiving love in countless opportunities and surprising ways. God took my wounds and from them brought gift. So this painting up here is my favorite image from today's gospel reading, mostly because I think it's the most kind of true image of what happened, as Father Gary kind of explained already. But the thing that really gets me about this painting is you got to think about how much pain Christ is in here. I mean, Thomas's fingers are like knuckle deep in his ribs. You know there is like no way that can be comfortable. And yet, Christ exposes these wounds. He encourages Thomas to feel them. He opens himself up to a raw vulnerability out of love for Thomas, just as he opened himself up to pour himself out in love for all of us on the cross. In other words, Christ had the audacity to believe that some of his wounds could be gifts.
Look again, if you would, at that painting. Molly has done for us tonight exactly what Jesus did in this gospel and what Caravaggio does in that painting. Tell me if it doesn't make her more human. Tell me if it does not help you recognize her more for who she really is. If it doesn't make her more real to you. And if it doesn't open up for us that something more, that a wound could become a gift. And if that is true, why do we spend so much time and energy hiding our wounds from each other? Why do our wounds carry so much shame for us? Thank you, Molly. You've done for us something tonight of what Jesus did for his friends in that gospel. A wound might destroy the bone and marrow of our bodies, but it will never destroy the bone and marrow of our being, our ability to love still.